Hi, this is Outlaw Bookseller, and this is part 2 of my Michael Moorcock hardcover collection, primarily first editions. And last time we were looking at the Demy format books. Today we're going to look at the rest of the Demys and a few sort of things in other formats. These here, which I'm going to use as a backdrop, are 3 of Mike's non-fiction books. So I'll talk about these first, and these 2 here are in the Royal format, which is larger than the Demy, and this is sort of a larger trade hardcover in the middle. And I'll sort of use those, as I say, as the backdrop and talk about them first. So this one here is Death is No Obstacle, which is, it's really a book-length interview with Mike, held by Colin Greenland, wonderful science fiction fantasy writer, also a critic, who sadly has never had the acclaim he should have had, except in the late 80s when he did a book called Take Back Plenty, which was a space opera that came out round about the same time, but a year after Ian Banks's Consider Phoebus, and to my mind a better book and a more fun book. And it was kind of ahead of its time because the main protagonist was both black and female, and there were 2 sequels, and Take Back Plenty is now a Gollancz masterwork, so do seek it out. So and it's really great fun, and I'm not a massive space opera fan, as I said before, but that is a great one. So this is a book-length interview with Mike about his work, and there's an introduction by Angela Carter. It was published by the very wonderful Savoy Books of Manchester. Dave Britton, Mike Butterworth, who you know, have gone unsung except amongst, you know, those of us who are in the know. And you know, they say that nobody goes to prison for publishing books anymore, but the 2 Mikes did go to prison when they're involved in a case involving God's cop James Anderton, about the publishing of a comic called Meng and Eka. And you know, they've sort of fought against censorship and things, and you know, people think these things no longer happen, but that happened about 20-25 years ago, so it does still take place. So you know, do support Savoy. They do some great books. They've done books by Colin Wilson, Mike, other writers, and you know, they deserve our respect. John Harrison told me that he wrote A Storm of Wings with the typewriter balanced on his knees behind the counter, supposedly serving at Savoy. And Savoy is sort of disguised thinly to a degree in his short story Egnaro, which is orange spelt backwards, in The Ice Monkey, one of his finest stories. So there we go. So that's Savoy for you. Next we have a book from 1986, I believe, and this is the Harrop edition. This is the only edition there's ever been of Letters from Hollywood. Now, it's illustrated by Michael Foreman, who's more well known as a children's illustrator. It's a lovely book. I am going to show you that in detail at some point when I do a Hawkwind video, because my copy is also signed by Linda Steele. And Linda Steele was Harlan Ellison's assistant, and that's how she met Mike, because this is about the time when Mike went to the States to write a screenplay, or a screen treatment at the very least, for a Hollywood studio for a sword and sorcery film, which never happened. And he stayed at Ellison's place in LA, and he wrote the letters in this book to J.G. Ballard. And when I first met Mike and Linda, I got her to sign her as well, because that's how they met, and she's a big part of the narrative. And it's a great fun book. Sadly, there's never even been a paperback. That's the only edition. And it's lovely. So I'm going to show you that in a Hawkwind video I'm going to do about their album Choose Your Masks, because Mike wrote two songs on there, 2 lyrics, and they were credited at the time to Linda for reasons which I won't go into here. Also, we have Wizardry and Wild Romance, Mike's look at epic fantasy, but he talks about Tolkien, Winnie the Pooh, all sorts of stuff, and how he writes fantasy novels and things like that. So those are great books to get. I can't recall whether there's ever been a paperback of this. I think there was. This is Gollancz. All of these are signed. They're wrapped, as you see. I'm not going to show you. You'll see plenty of Moorcock signatures throughout this video as time goes on. So we'll move forward now and look at the rest of the Demys. But just before we do, I'm going to show you one little oddity. This is the only Octavo hardcover, which of course is smaller than a Demy and smaller than a Royal, that I have by Mike. And this is the, let's see, it's the New English Library, Hodder and Stoughton, first edition of The Warlord of the Air, the first of the Oswald Bastable novels. And these are great, of course, and they're often described as sort of proto-steampunk. And, you know, they're sort of popular fiction, but he uses them to examine sort of dictatorship and power and empires, those sort of things, and they're great fun. I really love this one. My partner, the Video Widow, read this and she really enjoyed it. It's very accessible, really great book. I do have an omnibus edition. There's been lots of different omnibus editions. There is one published by Doubleday, which I'd really like, which is nicer than the one I have, but it's uncommon in the UK. So that's the only book by Mike I have in an Octavo hardcover format. So there we go. So that starts us off, and we'll move on and we'll get looking at the rest of the Demys, which we start to look at in the last video. And again, a special one to begin with. This is a book that I mentioned in the last video, and it's a book which I bought way back in about 1983, I believe, maybe 82, and it was the first hardcover novel I ever ordered for myself in a bookshop. And I would have been, let's see, about 19 at the time. This is the 1976 Allison and Busby reprint of The Final Programme, which I mentioned. And I did say I lent this to my friend Steve, and round about that time, I think I only had it for 6 months, a year before I lent it to him. And he's just sent it back to me. So it's been out of my hands for nearly 40 years. And it's, you know, it's seen some sort of fading on the spine and what have you, but I'm really pleased to have it back after this long time, because it really has a special sentimental sort of meaning for me, because I was really keen on this book, and you couldn't get a paperback at the time. I had a second-hand paperback, but this I bought new. And I remember I ordered it from Bows and Bows in Cardiff, which was actually the first bookshop I worked in later on, and it took about 6 weeks to come, and I had to keep going in and asking for it. And you know, it wasn't a reprint of a reprint, so I don't really know why it took so long, but there you go. So so I'm really pleased to have that back again. So thanks for sending that back to me, Steve. And it just shows that, you know, we don't see our old friends enough. We should see them more. So, you know, we must sort of remedy that in the new year. So that's The Final Programme. And this is super uncommon edition, actually. Really uncommon. So I'm really pleased to have that back. And that's a Demy. So moving forward, we finished the last video with a little chat about the Dancers at the End of Time, and I had that with a in an omnibus edition with a Rodney Matthews cover. But of course there were 2 other books in that sequence, 3 if you include Elric at the End of Time, which will be coming later on. This is the 4th one, Legends from the End of Time, which is 3 novellas, and it's published by W.H. Allen, whose paperback imprint was Star. And W.H. Allen was sort of kind of like the runt of the litter then. You know, they were regarded as a bit naff, but they had people like Henry Miller and Charles Bukowski. The first Charles Bukowski book I bought, which I still own, is an A-format paperback of Bukowski's Factotum. Now this is a wonderful Rodney Matthews cover, as you can see, absolutely beautiful. And I bought this from a dealer. I'm not sure if this one is signed. Yeah, that one is signed. I say most of my Moorcock firsts are signed. Lovely, really nice. And with decorations by Jill Riches, who was Moorcock's wife, or at least partner, and then I believe after that she was the partner for a while of Robert Calvert of Hawkwind. So there you go, and obviously a very talented illustrator. And I say this Rodney Matthews cover, absolutely beautiful, and that's in very fine condition, as you can see. I probably bought that about 20 years ago. I possibly bought it from Cold Tonnage Books, I can't remember, but it's a lovely one, and very uncommon in that condition. I'm just going to move that over there a bit. And finally, in the Dancers series proper, we have The Transformation of Miss Mavis Ming, also known as The Return of the Fire Clown. That's Rodney Matthews again, and that's a scene from the book, and these dinosaurs are made out of jelly in the book. They're at somebody's party, I think, and they melt when the Fire Clown spaceship, which looks rather like Thunderbird 3 there, doesn't it, returns to Earth. So it's not just the final Dancers book, but it's also a sequel to The Winds of Limbo, aka The Fire Clown, a very Bester-esque late 60s, early 70s SF novel that Moorcock wrote many years before, and there's sort of flashes of maybe Harlan Ellison's TikTok Man in there as well, possibly. But yeah, absolutely lovely. And again, W.H. Allen, Star. And, you know, there's Mike on the back in all his sort of cool hippie glory there. Lovely, beautiful. So 2, I think, of my favourites there. Really lovely books. Rodney Matthews, we don't really see enough of, you know, his work these days. That one's not signed, but there we go. But lovely books. So Then an oddity, Mike also wrote a couple of thrillers about a Cockney sort of secret agent called Jerry Cornell, which of course is very like Jerry Cornelius. And this is the second one. This is the Russian intelligence, and that's a NEL, New English Library, Hodder and Stoughton hardcover. This is unsigned. I think I bought this new. I don't know why I didn't get that signed, because so I met Mike several times over the years and got him to sign loads of books for me in the late 80s, early 90s. So that's quite unusual. The Chinese agent is more uncommon. I've got a lovely Grafton paperback of that. I am going to do a Moorcock paperbacks run at some point and show you some of those, because you know, they are lovely. So that's an unusual one that you don't see very often these days. So there we go. And still an absolutely beautiful neck. They obviously use decent paper then at NEL. Good for them. So one of the publishers that Mike was with in the early 80s, NEL, they did quite a few books really together. And one of my favourites from that period is the very first Von Beck book, The Warhound and the World's Pain. And this is a first again. These are all firsts unless I say otherwise. And there it is, absolutely gorgeous. And that looks like an Achilleos cover. I'm not sure if it is, but I would say at a glance it is Chris Achilleos. And this to me was one of the finest sword and sorcery novels I've ever read. It's sort of historical set, very elegantly, beautifully written and trim, and it's about the quest of the Holy Grail. And it was the first of Von Beck series, which is one of my favourite Moorcock series. From the period, I think, when he was doing his very best at meshing literary style with popular writing. And this is signed. Let's just have a quick look there. There you go. And absolutely beautiful, very elegant, wonderful book, and a beautiful edition. And it had that edition as a B format paperback. A lot of these NEL ones were B format paperbacks. Some of them never had A formats, which is a shame. So I'm very, very fond of that. And I do love the Von Beck books. I think they're fantastic. Another one, which is a Von Beck book, but slightly tangential, is The Brothel in the Rosenstrasse, which is sort of an erotic historical novel with sort of minor thriller elements. Again, it's NEL, very sort of cheeky cover there, very fond of Sakal, lovely. And there's a little inscription there from Mike. So what does he actually say to Steve? Thanks for inviting me to Bath. My very best wishes, from Mike. Bath, July 88. So that was the first, wasn't the first time we met. I met him at the Worldcon a couple of years before that. And I think it was the year of 87. And also signed on the full title page, because Mike's a pro. He does things properly. A little dedication on the front for end paper and the signature on the full title page the way it should be done. Lovely, beautiful, beautiful book, and very classy literature again there. Still with the wonderful NEL, we have the beautiful, now this is Achilleos, and this is Elric at the End of Time, which is a short story that sees Elric transported to the end of time with the characters there, and he's taking it all very seriously and they think it's a laugh. There's some essays in there by Moorcock about writing fantasy, some other bits and bobs, short stories. And there used to be a jigsaw available of this lovely wraparound showing sort of Melniboné or some other city of that that ilk, of that realm, of those days of yore. And it was very big, and I did have it. It was impossible to do because of all this detail. Doing Elric was easy, and there he is looking very imperious and handsome and slightly androgynous there. I do really love that, and the dragon behind him. I get one of those beautiful fantasy books going. And NEL, they really did a lovely, lovely job, it has to be said. You know, they don't make them like that anymore, and wonderful, wonderful writing. And the thing about these books is that none of the huge fat monstrosities, they're all economical, stylish, and you could see the influence of people like Poul Anderson and Jack Vance over Moorcock there, but of course he was always his own man, and you know, did these wonderful, wonderful books which are too neglected these days. I think I began the previous video by talking about the Opium General and Other Stories, which is Harrop. Harrop also did Letters from Hollywood, which I showed you earlier on. And I know I said that this was something I was very excited about because it contained the Alchemist Question, the very last Jerry Cornelius adventure, which tied up the sequence, there's thematic similarities with the final program, and also with the second Von Beck book, which is called The City in the Autumn Stars, which is one of my favourite Moorcock titles. And I'll show you that when we look at the Royal format Moorcock books. And as I said at the time, This was the first book I ordered for myself when I started working at Bows & Bows in Cardiff, and it was the beginning of my adventures as a hardcover science fiction collector, and it's still absolutely beautiful, signed, lovely stuff, and it has a very special place in my heart. So there we go. Another publisher that Mike worked with at that time was Sakura Warburg, a very distinguished literary publisher who published people like George Orwell. And in the early 80s, Mike started to work on the Between the Wars sequence. And this was the first one. The Between the Wars sequence featured Colonel Piat as the focus character and narrator, and wonderful historical cover there. And Between the Wars is a great sort of satirical historical romp through the 20th century from its sort of birth. And Piat is a Jewish anti-Semite, is the only way I can sum him up, and he's a horrible person, and he gets involved in all these historical events. He's a bit like the Forrest Gump of sort of European history and its sort of horrors in the mid 20th century. That's Byzantium Endures, and lovely again, little inscription there from Mike, signature on the full title page in the proper manner. And these took years to come out, and I'm very fond of them, and I think really they come and they go out of print. They've never quite been jacketed and presented in the way they should have been in paperback, but they are major works for him. And like all his books, they are part of the Multiverse Eternal Champion sequence, but only just they mention Jerry Cornelius every now and again. So they're tangential. There is a slight science fiction element at the beginning of Byzantium Endures when Piat claims to have invented a flying machine. You know, it's sort of tangential, but it's there. So that's the first one. And a few years later, Sakura published The Laughter of Carthage. And again, I'm going to show you that. That's going to be, yeah, we've got a bookmark in there from Jerusalem Commands, which is the third in the series, signed again. So there we go, and absolutely lovely, really, really nice. I do like these covers. They don't make them like this anymore, but they've got a real weight of history there, which I really, really like personally. So that was the first two. And with the Between the Wars series, it's a tetralogy, 4 books. If you read out the titles, they form one sentence which sums up the sort of conflicts and the issues they address, which are Byzantium endures the laughter of Carthage. Jerusalem commands the vengeance of Rome. And this is Jerusalem Commands, which didn't come out till the 90s. There was quite a hiatus between the second and third volumes. And this is published by Jonathan Cape. Cape, to me, produced amongst the most beautiful books in the world ever. I love their jackets between about the early 70s and the beginning of the 90s. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. And if you said to me, you have to collect literary fiction only, British publisher, who would you go for? I would go for Cape, because the covers are just astonishingly beautiful. And again, nice inscription from Mike there, from one of our times meeting together when I hosted him probably for the second or third, I think it was the third time for a signing and an event in Bath. Jerusalem Commands bookmark inside. There we go, that's 92, which I think was the third time, because the second time, City of the Autumn Stars, was a new book, so that was very late 80s. Sadly, The Vengeance of Rome was also published by Cape, so went from Sakura to Cape, but it was only published in a royal format, so I'll show you that again. So unfortunately, you know, getting these books in a common livery and hardback is impossible, which is a shame really. So you see the difference, but at least they're the same format. So Byzantium endures the laughter of Carthage, Jerusalem commands the vengeance of Rome. So there we go. And just to finish up on the Demy trail for Moorcock at the moment, whether I'll ever collect any more, I'm not certain. I have actually sold some of my collection. I did at one point have pretty much everything Mike did. I've sold some of the peripheral things, space, money, that sort of stuff. But to sort of sum up, currently my Demy collection is this World and US first edition of The Dragon in the Sword, which is published by Tor, I believe. No, it's Ace, I do apologize, Ace Fantasy. And it's got really sort of nice cloth there, buff cloth, and lovely brown end papers, and it's signed. And this came out probably about a month or two before the UK edition, and I think I bought this at possibly Forbidden no, it wouldn't been Forbidden Planet in London, maybe. It's more likely to have been Forever People in Bristol, a great science fiction bookshop, which sadly closed down in the 90s and was the first specialist SF store I ever went to. And this is the third Von Beck book. It's also one of the 2 alternate climaxes to the Eternal Champion sequence. And it's also the third sort of Eternal sort of Champion book in a way as well. It sort of ties all those things together. It's very clever, very elegant. And, you know, the Nazis are involved, as you can see from the inverted swastika there and what have you. And really lovely, elegant book. They don't really make them like that anymore. It's lovely sort of Art Deco design there. Van der Sakkel, Elric on the cover. Is it Elric? No, it wouldn't be Elric. It would be, I think it's The Rose maybe. It's years since I've read it, but I really loved this book, so I must go back and reread that again. And M. John Harrison told me once that before this was published, he and Mike were drinking and talking, and they were talking about what was the worst possible title, the most cliche title you could have for a fantasy novel, and they decided it was The Dragon and the Sword. And then Mike was bemused to discover that Mike Moorcock then went out and wrote a book called The Dragon and the Sword. So, you know, Mike Harrison was very sort of entertained by that. And he told me that, I think, when he stayed at my place in the late 80s. And, you know, it's a strange sort of little story, that, but a great fun one. So those are my Moorcock Demys, the second part of it, and a few odds and sods. So I'll probably be back in a week or two with at least some of the Royals, if not all of them, to look at the Royal formats, and maybe a paperback one as well, as I say. So this is Outlaw Bookseller, Michael Moorcock first editions, mostly signed out. And for those of you who enjoyed the last one, I should say I will keep the SF and fantasy coming if you subscribe. Thanks for watching and happy collecting. What?